Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Solo ReacTalk. This afternoon, I am going to be reacting to the Badab War Part 2, the Tyrant of Badab, Warhammer 40k lore made on the Oculus Imperia YouTube channel. If you guys want to check out my previous reaction to Part 1 of the Badab War, remember that the playlist card for my reaction is going to be at the top right here. Just click on it and be able to access them. If you want to check out the original video as well as Oculus Imperia's YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. Yes, it's been some time since Part 1. Sorry about that, guys. Sorry about that. But yes, in Part 1 we were told about the Maelstrom Zone. It's in Ultima Segmentum. It's quite close to the Galactic Center. It is heavily enriched with minerals that would benefit the Imperium of Man. However, the Maelstrom Zone is also filled with undesirable people. If I can say that. Undesirable people. Some xeno races are there, heretics are there, chaos anomalies and entities exist in that zone as well, because the Maelstrom is also a warp anomaly of its own making. And yeah, really the Maelstrom Zone is rich, but it is the wild west, if I can say that. The High Lords of Terra have instituted the creation of the Maelstrom Warders to protect and to make sure that the investments of the Imperium of Man in that sector are protected, because they've already lost a planet in the sector, which was the capital, if I'm not mistaken, of the Maelstrom Zone, and I think that was Sitnax, if I'm not mistaken. The planet was destroyed by chaos cultists. It was a very big loss for the Imperium of Man in the Maelstrom Zone, and Badab has now replaced Sitnax as being the capital of the Maelstrom Zone, and with that also more investments in chapters have been brought into the zone, and they have been trying their best with whatever resources they have at their disposal to maintain order and free space for the Imperium of Man in the Maelstrom Zone. But it is becoming difficult because the High Lords of Terra, in their grand wisdom, have thought that, you know, investing a lot more resources into the Maelstrom Zone is not something that should be put on the table for the moment. So the Astral Claws, the leading faction of the Maelstrom Warders, have been going through campaign after campaign, fighting against very difficult opponents, and they've also lost a chapter master as a result of all the conflicts that they've been having. And a new chapter master called Luft Huron has taken command of the Astral Claws, and he's young, you know, he is young, he's ambitious, he is a young lion, and he wants to prove himself as being the new chapter master of the Astral Claws. And he would also, I'm assuming, would need support from the High Lords of Terra for further expansion and security within the Maelstrom Zone. Will the High Lords of Terra give him that support? It remains to be seen, since his predecessor was going through the same situation, and the High Lords of Terra did not give them support. And you know, as we can see, the Maelstrom Zone is still under contention between the Imperium of Man and various other factions that exist in that zone. So let's see what Luft Huron can do with what he has in the Maelstrom Zone. Will he be able to protect that zone and also be compliant with the Codex Astartes, or be compliant with the laws of the Imperium of Man? We'll see. We'll see if he can keep that up, and for how long. Yeah. Alright, let's continue. Part 2. 3, 2, 1, go.
If one had begun one's chronicle of the terrible and hateful Badab War with a statement that it had been fundamentally caused by the taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems being in dispute, one's acolytes would have scoffed and powered off their archive cogitators in search of a more serious explanation upon the subject.
I don't know. I mean, paying what is due to the Empire is very important. And if there is a region within the Empire which is withholding its payment, it is a threat. It is a threat to the crown. It is a threat to the integrity of the Empire. Because other people are looking. And if they see that there is a sector or there is a domain that does not adhere to what is expected of them, then why should others follow suit? Why should others follow what is expected of them? If they can do it, why can't we? So it's very important that all vassals of the Empire adhere to what is expected of them. Yeah. So wars can definitely start because of not paying, your taxes. It's very serious. It's very, very serious.
For how, indeed, could something so simple as tithe be involved in one of the most vicious civil wars to ever rend the Imperium asunder? How indeed? But I tell you that it is just so. Would that it were simpler, but as with all things surrounding the events of the war, it was far from direct. The fall of the astral claws was no quick thing, no one act that precipitated catastrophe. And if we are to understand, we must be granted the fullest of accounts possible. In one's previous record, you were introduced to the Maelstrom, the Imperial claims to the sectors surrounding that hideous warp anomaly, and an account of the early days of the Brotherhood of Astartes chapters, collectively known as the Maelstrom Warders, up to the ascension to chapter mastery of the Astral Claws by Luft Huron. Know then that this is a further record of the events leading up to the outbreak of hostilities in the Badab sector, covering the rise of the Tyrant, the rebuke of the High Lords, and the schism of Badab. As noted in one's previous record upon his rise to power, Chapter Master Huron had vastly increased the spacefaring capabilities of his warriors through the incorporation of non-codex vessels, and had expanded the chapter's armory significantly through the addition of often prescribed and even exterminatus-grade weaponry. All was done on the young chapter master's claims of necessity, harshly rebuking any who would question his non-standard practices, which, it must be said, often skirted and outright broke the strictures of the Lex Imperialis.
Yikes. But it doesn't seem like there's anyone here to perform oversight over the actions of Luft Huron. I understand why he would do all of these things. However, yes, it is against the laws and regulations of the Imperium of Man. No matter how you try to cut it and dice it and try to explain it, the letter of the law is clear. And if you're not obeying it, there are consequences to that action. I feel for him. I get him. I understand Luft Huron and why he's doing all of this. It's just, that's the way things are in the Imperium of Man.
To Huron, or so he claimed in the years following his appointment in 715 M41, all this expansion of the claws was done because the Maelstrom Zone had been abandoned by the High Lords of Terra. While Terra was in dereliction of its duty, he claimed, the Maelstrom Warders, and the Astral Claws specifically, never would be. All he did for the good of the Zone and its loyal Imperial citizens.
The High Lords of Terra should have performed like a rotation of guard duty in the Maelstrom Zone. They should have taken out the Astral Claws as well as it's the Mantis Warriors, right? Yeah, they should have taken them out and put new chapters to replace them. And this must be on rotational basis. So they stay there for at least 100 years You stay there 100 years, you patrol, you maintain, you control, and then you leave after 100 years. We bring in new people to take over the stewardship of the Maelstrom Zone. That's what they should have done. But
in 512, 718 M41, 3 years after Huron's ascension to chapter mastery, Badab Primaris, the capital world of the Maelstrom Zone, suffered a failed coup d'etat against its aristocratic rulers, leading ultimately to an abortive civil war that threatened to fully consume the hive world. Unwilling to see the jewel of the zone fall to the fires that Signax had, the Astral Claws intervened to crush the rebels. Under heavy interrogation, several ringleaders revealed their ties to off-world smuggling rings that themselves had connections to the piratical raiders that plagued the zone. The same smuggling rings had been flooding the underworld of Badab with cheap arms and narcotics cut with industrial chemicals, with the intent to not only profit from the sale, but the hope that tensions would boil over into an even more profitable open war.
Badab 2, Badab Primaris, Badab Sector Capital, Transsolar Hive World, Adeptus Astartes Fortress Monastery, Astral Claws, Palace of Thorns, Hive Domina, Throne World of the Tyrant, 5.17 billion.
Huron, enraged at such widespread corruption occurring on the most populous planet in the zone, responded with overwhelming force. The rebels and their cells were annihilated, with extreme prejudice, but the Astral Claws did not stop there. Civilian protests at the destabilizing effects of the coup were similarly crushed, and the Claws became renowned for dragging members of the aristocracy from their high hive manners to execute them very messily and very publicly.
Wow. I mean, that's a bit too intrusive. I think that is blurring the lines of jurisdiction and authority. Because, yes, I understand quelling a potential rebellion. I get that. But now when you are killing the high officials on the planet, I think it's going a bit too far. I don't know. I get it, in terms of calling the rebellion, but then when you're killing the officials, yeah, and also the civilians who are protesting, it's a bit too dangerous. You're skating on thin ice there.
Connections between the ruling class and the smuggling operations were quickly established, and all those found even moderately involved were slaughtered at the hands of the Claws. Unwilling, he claimed, to let a power vacuum form in the aftermath of the destruction of the majority of the planet's rulership class, Huron took to many a surprising step. He assumed direct control of the entire Badab sector, personally. Styling himself as the Tyrant of Badab, a name he claimed was only appropriate as a designation for one who was there to bring the harshest of the Emperor's justice, Huron took the worlds of Badab as his chapter's fief, and Badab Primaris for his new seat of power.
I think he's trying to make a new Ultramar sector here. The 500 worlds of Ultramar. Yeah, he's trying to make something similar, but in the Maelstrom Zone. Yeah.
Claiming the precedent of distant and glorious Ultramar.
Exactly.
Huron spoke proudly of ushering in a new era for the Astral Claws, the Maelstrom Warders too, and indeed the entire zone. No longer, he claimed, would rot be let fester in the hearts of these worlds. The purges continued, unabated, for years. All elements within the zone deemed morally unworthy, or worse, morally recidivist, were excised, brutally and visibly.
But like I said, I don't... He's treading into waters he's not supposed to, destroying the political apparatus of the Maelstrom Zone, or should I say the Badab Primaris, killing them off and then replacing them with yourself, your chapter, as the new political head of the planet. It's going beyond your jurisdiction. I think in matters like this, it requires the Inquisition to investigate. It requires the Ibites to investigate, and for them to find out who are the people who are, connected with the smuggling rings, and the smuggling rings connected with these bandits that are supplying them from space. So essentially, this is going beyond your jurisdiction, and it should have been allowed for the Inquisition and the Ibites to do their job and to root out those that are committing these heinous, treasonous acts, I should say. Yeah. But, Luft, if you think you can do a better job and you can unite the Maelstrom under one vision, under one focus, then why not? You're not the first warlord. You're not the first warlord. You're just one in a long line of warlords in the Imperium of Man. Yeah.
By the Astartes of the Astral Claws. The centralization of power around Badab was the work of decades, but it only increased in rapidity as the years wore on. The armories and fleets of the Claws and their fellow Warders chapters continued to expand as Huron brought more and more elements of the Imperium within the zone under his personal purview. Astral Claw squads established watch bastions throughout the entire Badab sector, staffed fully by Astartes from the Claws and unaugmented humans fully loyal to Huron. Political allies amongst the local Mechanicus, Ecclesiarchy, Munitorum, and Administratum offices had their power vastly increased by the tyrant's patronage, but all would ultimately pay heed to his will. Badab became a pocket empire in all but name, Huron even going so far as to completely reorganize the entire defense force within the zone, cutting through the usual chains of planetary and sector command by establishing the Tyrant's Legion, a unified structure for the entirety of the Astra Militarum and planetary defense forces of the Maelstrom.
Definitely, he is copy and pasting what he probably studied from the Ultramar of 500 worlds, and he's applying it now in the Maelstrom zone. Yeah, I like it. I like the idea. I do. I'm just worried that not only the Inquisition but the High Lords of Terra are going to take notice of what you're doing here. And I don't know if they're going to like it. We'll see.
This was intended to deny the usual isolationism that was common amongst regiments stationed in Borgia regions, such as the Zone, but was nonetheless quite unprecedented. The Militarum and planetary defense forces are siloed in the Lex Imperialis, often for a reason. Command flowed down to the Legion from Huron alone, and while there were many detractors to the move, those who sought to cite precedent or law or simple expediency, they were simply removed from the equation, and all knew by whom.
Removed. Removed.
By 790 M41, the Tyrant's reforms, if such a massive power seizure can be called such, had apparently succeeded. The Tyrant's Legion had held its own against a dozen major pirate raids, something no unaugmented Imperial force had actually managed for years. With the necessity of defense now handled by baseline human regiments, the Astral Claws were freed from their protective stance to go on the offensive, crushing numerous pirate worlds and Xenos warrens in stunningly brutal lightning raids that utilized the expanded capabilities of the chapter's fleets with aplomb. It was, as emerged in the dreadful aftermath of what was to come, around this time that Huron and the Astral Claws began to cease their shipments of gene seed to the Magi Invigila of the Adeptus Mechanicus. An arm of the wider Mechanicus Biologius, the Invigila is a subset of the machine cult responsible for the monitoring and preservation of the genetic purity of the Adeptus Astartes. Under their remit, they are granted shipments of Astartes gene seed from every single chapter, the genetic template from whence a chapter develops all the biological enhancements that are required in the creation of one of the Emperor's Angels of Death.
So, the astral claws are not, giving over their gene seeds to the accountants, if I can say that. They're not giving it to the Mechanicus for them to examine the gene seeds to see if there's any abnormalities or impurities, and then probably they will give it back. I'm not entirely sure, but they need to be examined. They need to be tested to see if the gene seeds are still viable and can still be transplanted into human subjects, to make more Astartes. Now, why would he do that? I'm sure there's going to be some heavy penalties for not adhering to this very, very important, system of accountability, if I can say that.
This is a vital part of the process that ensures the survival of a chapter. Should some cataclysm or other befall them, in battle or otherwise, the stocks of the Magi Invigila can restore them to operational strength. Should an unforeseen genophage ravage their stocks, the Invigila can, with the Emperor's blessing, discover its source. It is not uncommon for these shipments to be less than routine. The Adeptus Astartes are few, and their foes are many. A chapter may be on campaign for over a century, the exigencies of warfare forcing them to retain their gene seed reserves, should it be needed. The vagaries of warp travel, the bureaucracy of both Imperium and Mechanicus, any number of reasons besides can delay or interrupt the flow of the precious genetic material.
Yes, there will be reasons why, but at the end of the day, that gene seed better be on my table. It better be on my table. If I don't see this gene seed on my table, you are in trouble. Yeah.
First, lack of stock from the astral claws was claimed by the chapter as the former, a prerequisite for their expansion of imperial control in the Badab sector, lest they suffer some mighty setback. After years, petitions by the Invigila simply began to go unanswered. Some within the Mechanicus wondered if an altogether more sinister motive was at play, that the stymieing of the claws' gene seed was, in fact, a deliberate act. It would, in many ways, be one of the first major tenets of Astartes' traditions Huron and the astral claws would break. But it would not be the last.
Yeah, they've had a taste of human blood, so why should they stop now? It's so good. The freedom is so good. The ability to say no, I will not cooperate with whatever you want from me, is already implanted into Luft Huron. He's defying the laws and regulations of the Imperium of Man. He's doing it his own way, and so far no one has been able to get a hold of him and to tell him straight that what you're doing is wrong and you are dilly-dallying on the precipice of becoming a traitor. No one has been able to tell him that. No one of a high official, like an inquisitor or anyone from the other organs of state. No one has been able to tell him that. So he will continue to be rebellious until someone says something.
Huron, however, was buoyed by the successes of the 700s. His star was in ascendancy, his regime becoming unshakable, his chapter and his brethren and his realm actively prospering. No longer constantly playing defensive against all that the Maelstrom could throw at them, the Astral Claws were actively expanding the Emperor's domain, and permanently ending the threats posed by the sundry enemies of humanity. Seeing opportunity, he bade a delegation of petitioners to make the long and arduous journey from the Maelstrom Zone to Holy Terra itself, to present a lengthy document to the Senatorum Imperialis and the High Lords of Terra, outlining Huron's most audacious move yet.
I'm telling you, the Fabricator General in the High Lords of Terra is probably going to reject whatever Luft Huron and his chapter is requesting, because they are not adhering to the sacred tradition of sending gene seeds to the Invigilator for the Invigilator to check on it, research on it, and keep it safe should anything happen to the astral claws. This very important exchange and tradition, and I'm assuming it is also under law, has been defied by Luft Huron and his chapter. So I'm sure the Fabricator General already has this information, and he's going to insist to the rest of the High Lords of Terra that whatever Luft Huron wants, he will not get. Yeah. Maybe other High Lords of Terra will also have their own personal interests into this matter of the Maelstrom Zone. And they might also say no.
The complete subduing of the Maelstrom itself. Such a thing had not even been deemed accomplishable in the halcyon days of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor himself led the legions of Astartes abroad across the stars.
Audacious plan right there, Luft Huron. Audacious.
Yet Huron claimed it was possible. His petition outlining warp corridors into the storm, Major Xenos' archenemy and recidivist holdfasts, the incalculable resources the Imperium would gain by obtaining so many warp-tossed planets, celestial bodies, and space hulks, and perhaps, most tellingly, the sheer amount of military material and manpower Huron would need to accomplish it. The chapter master of the Astral Claws deemed that nothing short of a new founding would be needed to bolster the number of Astartes included within the Maelstrom Warders.
What? That is a big ask right there. That is a huge ask. I don't think they're going to give that to you. You don't have enough powerful friends within the bureaucratic halls of the Imperium of Man, Luft Huron. You just don't have the important backers. You don't have people who can back you up politically in those halls, or to discuss amongst the High Lords of Terra. You just don't have those people. So I don't know if they're going to really give you a new founding, a new chapter. I just don't think so. No ways. No ways. Nice little try here, but I'm sorry. This is just too much. This is just too much. I like this guy. I like how, arrogantly so, he's going to try. And of course, the High Lords are not going to entertain that. But it's entertaining. I like that.
And that he, as the protector of the Badab sector, should be the one to spearhead this. The petition was rejected outright by the Senatorum. It had long before its meagre hearing already been dismissed by the High Lords, whose judgment deemed the resources demanded far better spent elsewhere within the Imperium.
That might not be wrong. That might actually be true, that yes, resources are needed elsewhere across the galaxy. But I'm sure it is possible. It is possible that it can happen. It's just that they don't like Luft Huron. And like I said before, Luft Huron does not have the political clout on Terra. He doesn't have anyone important enough to vouch for him or to vouch for the Astral Claws and the rest of the warders in the Maelstrom Zone. And the High Lords of Terra, they have their own personal interests in the Maelstrom Zone. I'm assuming, that they don't want that status quo to change in the Maelstrom Zone. They don't want it to change. They want it to stay. They wanted it to stay the way it is, as this wild west zone where resources can be reaped from that place and at little cost. That's what I'm assuming. I don't know if that is true or not. I'm not sure. I'm just guessing on that. So yes, there's a lot of interests that will be against Lord Huron and his plans. But he has not made it easy for himself. He has not made it easy for himself. The way he is defying, the laws and the regulations of the Imperium of Man for his own ambitions or his own mission objectives, which are valid. However, it is breaking the law. And the High Lords of Terra are not going to like that about Lord Huron. They're not going to trust him. Yeah.
The presentation had been permitted as an acknowledgement of the work the Maelstrom Warders and the Astral Claws had done in the previous century of expansion. But the ruling of the High Lords remained, that if they had managed to accomplish all that they had with the resources at hand, then they were fully accomplishing their original remit as Wardens of the Maelstrom Zone, not crusading warriors. To Huron, it was a betrayal of all that he and his chapter had ever accomplished, and he responded with the only means at his disposal: the cessation of the sector's tithe.
That's a heavy move right there. That's a very dangerous, heavy move.
Since the foundation of the Imperium, the great tithe, Terra's due, the grand harvest, whatever your name for it, has ever been a point of contention between the Administratum and His Imperial Majesty's subject domains. For when in our history has taxation been, regardless, it is and always will be a facet of life within our Imperium. The reaping of human lives and material resources from every subject world within his borders. Per the remit of the Lex Imperialis, this is intended to be assayed based on a world's measure and ability to pay it, at least in theory, as often the records of the Administratum are less than complete. Some worlds may be subject to extortionate taxation because they share the same name as another, more prosperous planet, or because an acolyte misplaced a line upon a ledger or a zero in a number millennia beforehand. The system, as with all systems within the Imperium, is imperfect and brutal, but it is relentless, direct, and inviolate. Should those who break their obligation do so visibly, and by means that can be discovered, the long arm of the Lex Imperialis will bend towards retribution. Huron's termination of his domain's tithe was a deliberate act of protest against what he stated was the blindness of the High Lords to both the zone's plight and to the achievements of the Astral Claws. Withholding
that is not your position to make, Lord Huron. As a chapter master, I don't think that's your position. You're in no right to say such things. You're in no right to do such things. This is very dangerous. You're treading on treacherous activities here. You may not like the decision of the High Lords of Terra, but their decision is final. If you still feel as if more could be done, or what they have done to you is wrong, and you want some sort of recourse, then find that way politically. Don't jump directly into important matters that might result in your censure as a chapter. You have to think of this politically. Don't just attack with very powerful mechanisms like the due to Terra, the taxes, paying taxes to Terra. That's very, very dangerous. It's a very dangerous statement that you're making. Yeah. Oh well. Good luck.
Of their dues was just about the only means of protest available to anyone within the Imperium that can actually achieve anything. But often that
it achieves the attention of the High Lords of Terra on you, and not in a good way. They're not going to listen to you. They're not going to listen to your demands. No. You're a threat. They have to take you out.
Achievement comes at the end of a Arbites power mole, or worse, an Inquisitor. That a chapter of the Adeptus Astartes was responsible for it, an organization usually completely removed from this particular wheel of the Administratum, was quite unprecedented, and it certainly achieved in drawing eyes to Huron's worlds. The Tyrant had additionally stymied all trade that passed through the zone, cutting the Imperium off from the ore and mining operations in the Pale Stars. All the resources once claimed by Terra were now Huron's, and he diverted them fully to shoring up and expanding the zone's defenses and fleets. This took the form, in the Badab sector at least, of the construction of gigantic void-faring defense platforms, dubbed by the Tyrant the Ring of Steel. On Badab Primaris, Huron demolished the old palace of the deposed oligarchy, erecting in its place a fortress of his own design, the soon-to-be infamous Palace of Thorns. The Imperium did not immediately notice the sudden halt of all material from the zone.
Yeah, well, it takes time. It really takes time for that type of information to be relayed back to Terra, because, the Imperium of Man is a galactic-sized empire, and, collecting tithes from different star sectors across the galaxy takes time to register back, to Terra. So, yes, the long arm of justice to the Imperium of Man will arrive, just maybe not immediately. Yeah.
Because the Imperium does not immediately notice anything. Rather, as more and more broken contracts, delayed shipments, and missing resources piled up upon worlds that had come to expect them, word spread further and quicker that the Tyrant of Badab had reneged upon his word. Astropathic messages shot between the Adeptus Terra, the Adeptus Administratum, and the Segmentum Courts Temporal, as did the blame for letting the situation get to where it had. Ponderously, the Imperium would come to realize that it had arrived at a situation completely unprecedented. A disparity between the rights of the Administratum to collect the Great Tithe and the rights of the Adeptus Astartes to defend the Imperium by any means necessary. The Tyrant was asserting his claim over the full resources of the Maelstrom Zone in order to defend it and the Imperial citizens within, and doing so under the ostensibly same auspices the Ultramarines had always managed their own domain of Ultramar by.
Oh, nice. I like that. I wonder how will the High Lords of Terra and the Administratum, respond to that. Yes, how will they respond to that by Luft Huron? Nice.
While the Sons of Gilliman had always paid their tithes to the very letter of their requirements, there was nothing in the Lex Imperialis that stated they had to, if military exigencies forced them to deem such an act a threat to the sanctity and security of their fief. Officers and chroniclers of the Lex engaged in a war of words with petty bureaucrats, mining cartels, shipping conglomerates, mechanicus magi, adepts of Terra, and representatives of the claws themselves, in a legal dispute that would become known as the Schism of Badab, and one that would last for over a century and a half, 150 years of lexicographical feuding, during which time the Badab sector and the power of Huron continued to wax. Every victory the Astral Claws, the Maelstrom Warders, and the Tyrant's Legion delivered during this period is stained with the shadow of misappropriated arms and armor, all taking place under the backdrop of significantly worsening tensions between Huron and not only Segmentum authorities, but the Adeptus Administratum and the High Lords too. The sudden drought from a previously deep wellspring of resources was felt nowhere more keenly than in the Carthago sector, where for over a millennium the Carthan Lords had held a monopoly on the distribution of all Maelstrom Zone industrial goods. Buffered by far more war-torn regions, these oligarchs had grown fat upon the work and sacrifice of their fellow humanity, content to reap the benefits of their transit corridor existence. They were, however, still answerable to an authority, that of the Segmentum and its procurators general, and these tithe officers had little care for the reasons their tithes were suddenly stymied, only that they flow again.
Yikes.
The tyrant and his realm cared not for the fretting of the Carthan lords, if even they knew of them. Freed from the comparative ignominy of their garrison duties, the astral claws began to take their skills abroad across the galaxy, foraying beyond the borders of the Maelstrom Zone for the first time since their assignment there centuries before.
Are they allowed to do that? I mean, I thought their express, the intention of the High Lords of Terra was for them to only stay in the Maelstrom Zone and to deal with the problems in the Maelstrom Zone. But now they're going beyond that. Are they allowed to do that? Huh. But you know what? With Liv Huron, they don't care anymore.
During the final days of the Fourth Quadrant Rebellion, Huron was elected as overall theater commander by the combined assent of elements from the Astral Claws, Firehawks, White Scars, and Celestian Guard chapters. He led his warriors into the very depths of the fighting, supported by Imperial Guard regiments drawn from the Death Corps of Krieg and God engines of the Adeptus Titanicus Legio Venator. The task force annihilated all arch-enemy forces arrayed against them, a huge win for Huron, who won widespread praise for his leadership, if said did ultimately lead to a grudge of honor from the Firehawks, whose own chapter master felt spurned by the appointment of the younger Huron as overall commander. Returning to the zone buoyed by his success, Huron, through machinations and calls for aid, instigated a crusade by the zealous Black Templars, Astartes chapter, into the eastern reaches of the Maelstrom in 869 M41. While their brethren were covering their flank, the Astral Claws led the Lamenters and the Mantis Warriors from the Warpstorm's southern and northeastern corridors. What had been expected by most to be a failure in line with that of Huron's predecessor had been pivoted to a stunning victory, thanks...
Hold on, guys, it's starting to rain, and I can't hear Oculus Imperial. I just need to increase the volume. Okay, I think that's fine. Let's continue.
In large part, it must be noted, to Huron's own tactical planning and knowledge of the intricacies of Maelstrom Zone warfare. Fully 23 Xenos and arch-enemy fortress worlds were scoured clean of taint, their hated inhabitants put to the torch and the sword. These included several fringe planets that had come under the thrall of heretic Astartes from the ancient Word-Bearers Legion, a coup for any Imperial force, and one Huron and his claws took deep pride in. Encouraged by such pivotal successes, the Warders pushed further into the Maelstrom than any Imperial force in history had managed, with the Astral Claws and Mantis Warriors directing a massive invasion against the last remaining stronghold of the Flesh Ghouls of the Howling Gyre. Huron personally led the veteran first company of his chapter against the hateful creatures, detonating Exterminatus-grade Life-Eater virus capsules within their Skin Fortress, and purging from the galaxy a foe that had menaced the Imperium for thousands of years.
Skin Fortress. This is sounding a bit like Drukhari technology here. A Skin Fortress made out of skin. Nah, that sounds very Dark Elder type of, activity. Yeah. It's good that they're gone. Exterminate them all. Ugh.
The Crusade of Wrath should have been counted amongst one of the greatest imperial victories of the age, had there been anything in the way of justice in this pitiless universe. But, for all their later downfall that would condemn them unforgivably, the Astral Claws succeeded where none before them had ever done so. They undeniably made the Maelstrom Zone and the Imperium as a whole safer, and they had visited the most righteous of imperial justice upon the most hated of alien and heretic foes. They were poised to deliver yet more, but, as ever with their tale, outside forces intervened. The Black Templars were forced to direct their crusading Führer elsewhere, to provide aid to devastated Ultramar, that realm having suffered so dreadfully under the just concluded First Tyrannic War.
Okay, no, it's understandable now. It's understandable why they would have to leave. Definitely, it's understandable. At first I thought maybe someone, on Terra was like, no, bring back the Black Templars, they're not supposed to be there. And they would not give a reason, they would just bring them back. Or should I say, take them out of the Maelstrom Zone. But because of what's happening in Ultramar, I understand why they would direct them there. The Maelstrom Zone is important, but what was happening in Ultramar and what was happening on Macragge is just, it's national importance. It's national importance for the Imperium of Man. They cannot afford to lose the 500 worlds. They cannot afford to lose Macragge. So the Black Templars have to go to that sector and help out the Ultramarines, definitely.
Against Hive Fleet Behemoth. Having already sustained losses in excess of what would be considered advisable, and with stable warp corridors once overseen by the Templars now entirely unguarded, the Maelstrom Warders were forced to pull back, quitting the theatres within the warp storm for more defensible areas outside it. Huron was, it is recorded, incandescent with rage, railing against an Imperium that had once more denied him not only the glory of completing his greatest work yet, but also one that was seemingly intent on acting against its own best interests. Matters would only worsen. In the wake of Behemoth's staggeringly massive invasion, Ultima Segmentum was in utter disarray. The Tyrannic War had drawn in massive amounts of the Segmentum's available military forces, and everywhere the enemies of man sought to press their advantage against suddenly undefended marches. An orc invasion larger than any seen in generations rampaged seemingly out of nowhere into the Maelstrom Zone's Endymion cluster, the bloodshed of this invasion combining with the turmoil of distant Ultramar to swell the great storm of the Maelstrom itself into violent squalls and surges. Warp routes considered stable for centuries were rendered impassable. Doomsday cult uprisings in their hundreds racked the worlds of the zone from its core to its fringes. The world of Fargos Hex simply vanished without a trace, considered by Imperial record to have been devoured by the Imperia. Its true fate likely will ever remain unknowable. With their authority seemingly slipping through their fingers, their forces scattered across sectors piecemeal to stymie invasions and purge rebellions and combat warp-tossed space hulks and gassed ships, the Warders, and more importantly, the Tyrant of Badab himself, were watching their precious zone collapse in real time. Records of Huron's subordinates speak of him during these darkening days of the 800s of M41 as being unusually silent. The rage he felt in the aftermath of the Crusade of Wrath had seemingly vanished, replaced with an uncharacteristically dour and melancholic mien. He gave perfunctory orders for Astral Claw's interventions, be they against recidivist pogroms or Xenos purgations, withdrawing often to his own chambers or the chapter's archives for days on end. His reverend...
I guess maybe he's meditating, and trying just to understand how everything just unraveled the way it did. Because he was succeeding. He was succeeding. Him, what are they called? The Lamenters and the Mantis Warriors together with the Black Templars, they pushed really far. And now all of that blood and sacrifice has been all for naught. And I guess he's just trying to understand how everything unfolded the way it did, and how to make sure he doesn't repeat the same mistake. Yeah.
Stories did not go unnoticed, for the chapter master had always been a font of incredible vigor and energy, igniting those around him to action. The captains of the chapter conversed upon the worrying state of affairs, as had it not been Huron's leadership under which they had accomplished so much. Much has been made by scholars of this particular chapter in the history of the coming conflict, for it shares much in common with the fall from grace of other great traitors in Imperial history. What did Huron find in the archives, or in the Panopticon Solar, in those ancient records or those floating data hololiths? What indeed was he musing upon? Was a canker beginning to fester within him, spurned as he had been by the Imperium at just about every turn of his leadership?
That's possible.
Was resentment long building, finally budding, beginning to bear a terrible fruit? Or worse still, was this the culmination of a seed that had long been germinating, when deep in the maelstrom, raging against its tides, had the chapter master gazed into that hateful abyss?
That's also possible. That's also very possible. He might have been staring intensely into the maelstrom storm, and because it's a warp anomaly, maybe it did affect him mentally. Suddenly, to a point where he cannot detect that, there's corruption entering into his mind. And maybe also so suddenly that a librarian or anyone else within his chapter cannot recognize that there's something wrong with Luft Huron, Maybe, it's possible.
Only to have it open its many eyes and smile back at him with a mouth full of impossible teeth. It is possible, indeed, that the seed of corruption that had been planted in Huron's heart occurred long before his eventual rebellion. But it is likely we will never know the truth. As is so often the case with those of my order, all we may do is recount the terrible cost such downfalls have wrought, until such a time as the chronicle of the Badab War may continue. Ave Imperator, Gloria in excelsis terra. This video and this channel were made possible thanks to the very kind donations and support from my Patreon subscribers. If you'd like to help support the channel, head on over to patreon.com/Oculus Imperia. If you'd like to receive more updates about the channel and any future videos, you can contact me or follow me on Twitter at Oculus Imperia. Otherwise, please like, subscribe, comment, let me know your feedback, and as ever, thank you very much for watching.
Okay, guys, that is it. The rain is still very hard outside, so hopefully you guys can hear what I'm saying. But yes, this is it for the Badab War Part 2, the Tyrant of Badab Warhammer 40k lore made on the Oculus Imperia YouTube channel. Yes, Luft Huron is very, very ambitious. I like that about him. I like the fact that, he is not just going to sit on his laurels and just, accept things the way they are. He's very proactive. Very, very proactive. And I like that about this chapter master. Unfortunately, he's dealing with an empire that is not necessarily proactive. They have their moments where they are proactive, but majority of the time they are just reactive. And that is unfortunately because of the size of the Imperium of Man. It's so huge, it's so complex, it's so bureaucratically bogged down in its own dogmatic processes that, any form of proactive mentality is stifled. It's stifled right at the door before it even reaches, the higher echelons of the government. So Luft Huron is dealing with a government that is stagnant, that is unresponsive, that has its own interests at heart and not the interests of the continuation of the Imperium of Man in a far more secure manner. They're okay with the way the Imperium of Man is run right now. They don't want to rock that boat. They don't want to, become as proactive as Lufthuron, especially when it comes to the Maelstrom Zone. And of course, yes, understandably, there are also other galactic-wide threats that need to be attended to, like what is happening with Ultramar and what's happening on Macragge with the Tyranids during the First Tyrannic War. It's understandable. But what I'm saying is that there is enough resources that can be invested into the Maelstrom Zone. I'm sure. But the High Lords of Terra, they have their own reasonings. And also, Lufthuron has not been cooperating with the Imperium of Man, especially when it comes to the Invigilator, in terms of the gene seeds. That is very important. The requisition of such vital genetic material is important, not only for the continuation of the astral clause, but also to make sure that there is no sign of corruption or taint within the gene seed genetic material. So the fact that Lufthuron is not cooperating with the Mechanicus on this matter is also a very concerning situation. And I suspect that the Fabricator General did discuss this with the rest of the High Lords of Terra when they had their meeting about whether they should hear what Lufthuron is requesting for the Maelstrom Zone. So yes, on both sides they have done some serious mistakes, and it has resulted in a situation where Lufthuron is left to his own devices in the Maelstrom Zone. And maybe because he's young and is inexperienced in terms of the political storms and machinations of court and intrigue in, or should I say, on Terra. Maybe because he's not really well experienced in the politics of the day on Terra, it has resulted in him taking actions that are very rash. Withholding the tide to Terra is very, very concerning. And the fact that there has even been a legal battle, involving those who represent companies in the Badab sector, or not Badab sector, but in the Maelstrom Zone, I should say, and also the government organs of state being represented in these court cases, is also a very, dangerous highlight in what's happening with the Maelstrom Zone as well as the High Lords of Terra. So this schism of Badab that took hundreds of years of legal battles and requisitioning of legal opinions from different sides of the story is all very important, and it's intriguing, but the fact of the matter is that Lufthuron is not cooperating with his higher ups, if I can say that. Those who are higher than him as a chapter master. He is not cooperating. And usually when there is a sector or there is a planet that is not cooperating, the Inquisition is sent to deal with the matter. Or maybe even the Arbaites who are stationed on the planet, or those who are going to be transferred to the planet, will deal with the matter. So we'll see what happens in terms of the Inquisition, how they will respond to the situation in the Maelstrom Zone. And also, Lufthuron with his Mantis and Lamentus, as well as the Astral Clause chapters, together with the Black Templars, they really did push far. They really, really did push far in trying to tame the Maelstrom Zone. They also defeated very powerful, very dangerous Xeno races in the Maelstrom Zone, further securing the borders of the Imperium of Man. But however, things that are far more concerning to the Imperium of Man have taken over, the activities that Luft Huron and his Maelstrom Warders have been trying to do. And that's what's been happening with the Ultramar sector, as well as, in terms of the, what do they call it again? I forgot what it's called. The Tyrannic War. Yes, the first Tyrannic War. So, unfortunately, things that are beyond the control of Luft Huron have taken over, and the Black Templars had to get out from that system and head over to what's happening with the Tyrannic War. And it really made them suffer. The entire Ultima Segmentum has suffered because of what's happening with the Tyranids. And the Maelstrom Zone is not perfectly defended. There aren't enough of these, what are they called again, the Tyrant's Legion or the chapters to defend all that has been gained by Luft Huron and his Maelstrom Warders. So it is unfortunate. However, how Luft Huron responds to everything that has occurred, that is something that's going to be very key and very important to find out in the next part 3, because he's on thin ice, I think. He's on thin ice with the powers that be in the Imperium of Man. He's on thin ice with them, and I don't think they will really trust anything that Luft Huron is saying or requesting because of his past actions. But we'll see. But he's trying his best. He's trying his best to protect the Maelstrom Zone. He is inexperienced with politics. He's too quick to jump to using his gun or a bludgeoning hammer to get what he wants. And, that's not how you should play the game. That's not how you should play the political game. You don't show your hands. You don't show your guns to your enemies that way in a political game. You have to use other means of getting what you want. You have to get important friends. You have to get important individuals who have the ears of the High Lords of Terra and whoever else has authority on Terra. Showing your gun and brandishing it before everybody, it's a threat. It's a threat that's not welcomed in the court of politics. Yeah. It's good when you're a military officer, brandishing your weapons, brandishing your power and your authority, and that you can crush your enemies. This is not the same. This is not the same. In politics, you have to be very methodical in planning on how you're going to respond to a situation that is detrimental or a disadvantage to you. You can't be brandishing weapons. And when I say weapons, I mean withholding tax. Withholding tax to the Imperium of Man, because that's a weapon. He has brandished his most powerful weapon against the Imperium of Man, and that is withholding, what is due to the Imperium of Man. Yeah. So you can't be doing something like that. You have to think of another way to get what you want politically. That's how you play the game. And if you don't play that game, you will suffer. You will suffer. Yeah. Okay, guys, that's it. That's it for today with part 2. Remember, if you want to check out the original video as well as Oculus Imperia's YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos. And I'll see you guys hopefully this week. Hopefully with part 3. Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.